Last Man Home. On the Sky Road. Written by John Miro. Part 2. Something plonked on my forehead. Old reflexes, on high alert and worn raw by my recent return to civilization, took over. I leapt to my feet, hands sweeping up and out. Gris bleated like a sheep when I sent him rolling across the floor. The rest of the beer nuts he'd been flicking at my forehead bounced and skittered across the room. Luckily, the little marshmallow is built close to the ground. Like all Shelevs, Gris barely came up to my ribs. I raked a hand through my hair, pumping out steady breaths to slow the combat reflexes Gov had hardwired into me when I signed up. Those super-fast reactions gave me a fighting chance in the war, but what little super soldier goodness the boys and girls in lab coats hadn't scooped out of my head before allowing me to return to civilian life, they were a pain in the ass sometimes. Like waking up at DEFCON 1 when your buddy's pranking you. On the other hand, I could just tell Mr. Adrenaline Gland to dry up, and he'd listen. Calm came back faster than it had any human right to, and I chuckled at the sight of Gris feeling around for his thick Coke bottle glasses on the floor. "Serves you right, boss," I grunted. Technically, I was a contractor, and Gris was my buddy, not my boss. But Gris still signed the checks for the architectural designs I dreamed up for his chain of gyms. Yeah, he grumbled. Gris knew better than to sneak up on a sleeping grunt, and he knew better. He found his thick glasses, wrapped their strap around his hairless skull, and straightened out his expensive shirt and vest. "So you still got moves," he muttered, a little sheepishly. He didn't give me any grief, which I appreciated, as the nukes were going off between my ears again, thanks to him. He dusted his pants off and sat beside me on the stairs. "You seen Teddy?" I shook my head. That was a mistake, and I rubbed hard at the seized muscles, sending shooting pains down my neck. "He's probably still in the casino," Gris said. "Lucky Lizard's up 5 digits, last I heard." He let the room go quiet and absently rubbed the service medals on his black and red pinstripe vest. Some vets, like me, cringe when others ask them about their service. Other vets eat it up proudly as good food for the ego. Gris was a business guy, and he wanted to look the part in whatever he was doing. He wore his medals any time he was dressed to impress, which was most times. And yeah, he was proud of his service and happy to talk about it. It didn't bug me in Gris. He could wear his flash all he wanted. He had dragged me out of harm's way more than once. The little marshmallow could say whatever the hell he wanted about his time in uniform. He'd earned that and more. We sat there and watched the stars a while. It was quiet, and it was comfortable, in a way that not too many folks can pull off, and I appreciated it. "You know how much I paid for our slots on this boat?" he asked a little while later. I sighed. Gris wasn't looking for compliments or to remind me I owed him. That never entered into things between us or Teddy or Drew. Or Tom now, too, I realized. That was still real new, but it was true. I felt it in my bones. I shifted my eyes sideways, ready for another hallmark moment. "Here it comes." Gris punched my shoulder lightly. "What? I'm just saying I always wanted us to get back out here together." I nodded. Gris loved traveling and had been trying to convince me to see the worlds for almost as long as we'd been processed out of service. The little guy didn't have any ulterior motives. He made friends wherever he went. He had money to burn, and nothing seemed to get him down. He didn't need me around to prop up his ego or to get things off the top shelf for him. He could pay people for that. He just sincerely wanted to help me climb out of the isolation I'd sentenced myself to after the war. I was pretty messed up before peace broke out. Actually, ever since Lieutenant Callahan got listed killed in action after saving what was left of his men, which turned out to just be Teddy, Gris, and Drew and me by the time the blood and shrapnel cooled. We put in a few months of combat more after we lost Tom Callahan to the Elotans, but we were all pretty broken. The brass took pity on us with shipboard postings to sort ourselves out. But as luck would have it, peace broke out before we could get back in the mud again. You might not get this, but in some ways peace was harder on us than the war. Teddy went back to his homeworld and his job as an environmental systems maintenance wizard, but pretty soon he was itching for off-world contracts. He'd lived on the string of ships he kept habitable since about 6 months after the war. Gris owned a string of gyms. He could do business wherever he wanted. And Drew. As for Drew, well, there weren't too many jobs Sammy's were suited for, so the three of us made sure he passed the psych evals you had to pass to go on killing for a living during peacetime. I didn't like that much, that my sweet, simple friend took up mercenary work, but the alternative was worse. And still painfully recently, Drew's little quirks made our last reunion spectacularly messed up. Luckily, we'd sorted things out without anybody getting dead. It had been close, though. I remembered hacking off Drew's tentacles while he whimpered on the ground, lost in the fog of war. It had been real close. The whimpers in my mind were too fresh. The memory of his blood seeping through and soaking my knees, the smell of his death hormone, that was all too recent, too raw. And the ache from the hole he'd stabbed in my shoulder still hurt like hell, too. Before the last tentacle I'd hacked off of Drew spurted free, I vowed never to let anything like that happen again. That's what it had taken to get me back into the world. That and Tom. I reminded myself to buy Drew a drink next time I saw him, and maybe not tease him about the tentacle stumps anymore. I rubbed the sensitive new skin on the shoulder he'd skewered. Okay, maybe a few more stump jokes. Last Man Home. On the Sky Road. Written and recorded by John Miro. Stay tuned. Part 3 coming soon.